And we're live. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, students, practitioners. Welcome to the Green Room, episode 7. We're really pleased to have you with us today. We're going to have a great discussion. Our topic today, we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence and human rights in Africa. We're looking at the sustainable development impacts. Our guest speaker today is Jake Effoduh, and we'd like to welcome him to the Green Room, episode 7. Jake is a human rights lawyer with a demonstrated history of advocacy across domestic and international systems. He has worked within the justice sector in Nigeria, the West African ECOWAS human rights system, the African Human Rights Commission, and the United Nations Human Rights Council. Jake anchored 2 nationwide radio programs in Nigeria for 12 years, which aired on over 150 stations across the country and earned him several international awards, including winning the Future Awards Africa for Community Action and the prestigious African Broadcaster of the Year Award in 2016. Jake is a Vanier Scholar at the Osgoode Hall Law School. He's conducted research on the legitimization of artificial intelligence for human rights in Africa. Today, Jake is going to present about his work on artificial intelligence and human rights in Africa. So can we please welcome Jake? We can't hear your applause, but we sure do hope that you are clapping. Please welcome Jake Effoduh. Thank you very much, everybody. Hello, Jake.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jason McSparren. It is such an honor to be right here in the Green Room. Thank you for the great introduction and for the inspiration that you actually provide personally, professionally, and on this platform as well. So I'm really happy to be here in the Green Room and to speak with you about things that I'm very passionate about: human rights, artificial intelligence, sustainable development, and and environmental justice. These are things that really, really matter to us right now, especially with what we're going through. So it's an honor to share my humble insights and to engage. I hope this would be a collaborative platform where you can ask questions. I could ask questions because you're doing pretty much similar work as I'm doing as well. So we can both learn from each other and have a relative discourse on this. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Okay, Jake, if you wouldn't mind, our audience would like to hear a little summary of your work. If you could give us a little bit of a background on artificial intelligence and how it relates to human rights and environmental justice on the African continent, please.
Okay, so I have a passion for human rights. I've been a human rights lawyer for about 10 years now. But as we currently live in the 4th Industrial Revolution, artificial intelligence being one of the innovations of this time is something that affects us as human beings, whether we know about it or we don't. And so for the past few years, I've been researching on the legitimization of artificial intelligence and how it affects human rights for Africans and on the African continent. So maybe I might want to give a little bit of a background regarding like what exactly is human rights, because people always say human rights, what is it, where does it come from? So I could just give a little primer as to what is artificial intelligence, what is human rights, and then what is, when we talk about sustainable development or justice, what exactly are we talking about? So as a starter, people always ask me, where did the concept of human rights come from? Did it come from indigenous pre-colonial African communities? Can it be traced to like the holy books? Where exactly is the inspiration for this concept of human rights? Where does it come from?
Yes.
I always say, like, when it comes to human rights, sometimes it's quite ubiquitous in both academic and contemporary discourses, but it doesn't have any canonical meaning. It's criterionless, right? But in general common parlance, this concept actually refers to like standards, principles of, and norms that pretty much allow people to live and interact with certain values like dignity, freedom, equity, accord, fairness, right? So I know that these values have like various extensive meanings, but the concept of human rights simply refers to what human beings should enjoy and are inherently entitled to just because they are human beings. Be it the right to life, the right to freedom from torture, the right to personal security, the right to food and water. These are various categories or types of human rights that are considered indivisible, or that you cannot take them away from what a reasonable human life should be. So these rights are interrelated, they're interdependent on each other, and so therefore human beings need them to survive. For people to gain full development, for people and their communities to sort of thrive and live, they need these norms, they need these rights, right? And so when we talk about human rights, some of it might not be recognized in our local laws, but there's international law that sort of recognizes the status of, of what human rights are. And so instead of going to trace, like, where did it come from? Is it African? Is it not? I always say, of course it is African. From a historiographical perspective, there is no starting point for where human rights emanated from. But people have said, well, maybe it came from what's it called? Is it the Charter of Monday? It's the first Human Rights African Declaration. I think that was in 1222. That from there, people began to talk about, like, oh, what does it mean for us to agree on certain things? That we are both equal, even though we look different, even though we might be different genders, different tribes, even though you might be rich or whatever. So there's so many philosophical conceptions about what the concepts of human rights are and how they extend. But in summary, so I don't waste much time on discussing what human rights are. From an African perspective, I think consciously or unconsciously, we have been carrying this idea of what we understand human rights to be. So it's pretty much the fact that every human being, irrespective of who they are, where they are from, whether they are rich or poor, whether they are black or white, whether they are migrants or whatever, whatever tribe that they have, we all have equal footing, and we all have the responsibility to enjoy the necessities of life, such as food, water, work, healthcare, housing, education, and our culture, which is very essential for a dignified life. So I don't want to bore you with, like, the international conventions, like the UDHR or the ICCPR or the ICESR, but pretty much when we talk about human rights, we're just talking about the ability for people to own who they are and own certain things just because they are human beings and they're deserving of them.
Right. Yes, no, I'm well aware that, as you were saying, you don't want to go into all of the treaties and all of the institutions, but I really am grateful, Jake, because that foundation explanation of what human rights is probably very useful for a lot of people in our audience, right? Again, human rights is one of these concepts that you hear about it all of the time, right? We often hear it in the context of human rights abuses, right? Or people not actually being afforded their human rights. So again, it's one of these concepts that's bantered around so often that, not everybody may understand what it is, at its core, right? So I appreciate that explanation that, essentially human rights is just about dignity and security and, freedoms, right? Just to be whomever an individual wishes he or she would like to be, right? Yeah.
Of course, there's so many ambiguities when it comes to this concept, and human rights always has its criticisms as well. And it's a growing concept. It's a negotiated concept, right? But it's something that I, as a human rights lawyer for over 10 years now, I always say that, human rights is not one thing. It's constantly evolving and changing, because as a society, things around us change is the only constant thing in life. So with the introduction of AI, for example, or with climate change, for example, I don't think 20 years ago people were talking about human rights and climate change. Yeah, but in 2020, with the kinds of impacts that we see on our environment, climate change has now become a human rights issue. COVID-19 has now become a human rights issue. So it's a continuous negotiated process. And I don't want people to feel like, oh, okay, here comes another human rights issue. Expect that to happen. It's always going to be negotiated. But as long as you're within the same value framework, that people deserve respect, people deserve dignity, people deserve equality, people deserve access to sustainable living, a standardized living that people can feel that they can participate in communal life or in their general well-being, then that is what human rights is all about.
All right. Excellent. Okay. So moving from human rights, which direction should we go into? Should we talk about AI or should we start to talk about environmental justice? Where would you like to go?
I will talk about AI very briefly. I'm not an AI expert. I'm not a computer programmer or anything as that. I work in the field of law. So I'm always looking at the ways by which AI interacts with human rights. Artificial intelligence is something that is so difficult to explain to anyone because what is AI keeps shifting, right?
Yes.
I think a calculator could have been AI maybe 50 years ago because
Sure.
they have an algorithm and it could calculate things. But today, things like a calculator is pretty much not AI, right? From a
No,
computer
no.
science perspective, AI as a technology would be like computer programs that are capable of behavior
Okay.
that would normally require intelligence, right? But as a field of study, it is the development of AI systems. So what is artificial intelligence is something that not anybody can say, oh, this is AI and that is not AI. But generally speaking, anything that can think like a human being, can talk like a human being, can reason like a human being, can process like a human being, and it's not a human being, but a computer system or program, it most likely is AI.
Okay.
Of course, there is no standard definition of what AI is, but there are different categories. There's like machine learning, there's deep learning. There are also people who have theorized the idea that, well, AI systems will become super intelligent, that they would surpass our level of human thinking. So what AI is most times exemplified. When you think of your Gmail, for example, like when you're about to send an email and it gives you suggestions on what you should write or shouldn't write, that may be an AI system. When you're talking to your mobile phone and you can use Siri or any of these robot like Roomba that actually does your cleaning for you and is intelligent enough to know where there's dirt and where there's no dirt, that's an AI system. So people have engaged with AI systems without knowing it, right? If they've used Google Maps, or they use their phones, or they use certain tech devices, or even as we're using right here and right now, facial recognition devices, these are various examples of AI. The use of robots. Robots are called embodied AI because there's like a software, but there's a hardware as well. So there's so many ways that people engage and integrate with artificial intelligence. Defining it is one thing, but knowing what it is another. But the major point is recognizing that the definition is complex, but it's a really big growing phenomenon.
Yes.
And it is one of the constructs of the fourth industrial revolution. AI does not just work in by itself. You know, we've seen the integration between AI and machine learning, between AI and quantum computing, even things like biotechnology, for example, with COVID-19 vaccines, nanotechnology, for example. You see that AI has been able to do like research maybe 100 times faster than a human being would. AI can process information 10 times, 100 times faster than a human being would. An AI tax system, for example, can tell you your tax liability 25 times better than a human being would. So AI actually, I mean, the bloodline of AI is data, right? When there's enough data and there's an algorithm for the AI system to follow, it's able to predict things and, you know, make outcomes. Now, we can have a long conversation about what that means for human rights. We can have a long conversation about what that means for human rights in Africa. Because with AI systems, they are built under certain algorithms. These algorithms are not perfect, but they are also trained with certain data. And that data may not be fully representative of the people that might be affected by this technology. I'll cite two examples very, very, very briefly. I'm very pro AI. I'm a tech optimist. I'm not really a pessimist. I'm an optimist.
Sure.
But I think that optimism needs to be systematized and it needs to be directed in the right direction. If you leave AI as it is, it's not going to benefit us and it's not going to benefit human rights. So the two examples I would give is there was actually an AI system that was developed for self-driving cars. So a self-driving car company is developing an AI system that when it sees a human being, it would stop.
Right.
Now, if you've ever gone to a shooting range and you want to shoot, you notice that most of the diagrams there are like in a male figure. There's like a male templates, right?
Sure.
And so the cars were trained with a man-like templates. And so most people that the self-driving car has injured were women and children because the car had a difficult time to recognize them based on the data that was trained with the self-driving car. Now, of course, self-driving cars are 100 times safer than human beings driving the cars. So there's a huge value and benefit to that. But I'm just pointing out that with the way the data was, with the way the AI system was trained, it wasn't robust enough. It wasn't diverse enough for it to recognize, the child that it hit, for example, as a human being. Sure. The second one is one from Africa, whereby there was an autonomous system, an autonomous weapon system in South Africa that was being trained to fight war, but it turned around and I think it injured about 9 people and killed about 4 people. because the AI did not recognize the people it saw as human beings. They actually thought they were like monkeys or gorillas, for example.
So, well,
Yeah. So again, this is an example of how AI systems can be found wanting for like implicit bias or like
yes,
systemic racism. And sometimes it's not really directed that way. It's just lack of proper data or
lack of proper data.
lack of training the systems in a way that will be more representative. And so this is why the discourse on human rights needs to permeate different fields of endeavor. Computer scientists and technologists need to understand that the things that they create can have a huge impact on the recognition of human rights, can have a huge impact on the lives of other people, even though they did not envision it.
Yes. So with this beginning of the discussion, talking about human rights and now introducing artificial intelligence, can we talk a little bit and kind of redirect our discussion to the dynamics on the African continent? So one of your recent articles, you talk about 7 different ways that AI is being implemented in Africa. And one of the things that you mentioned is that certain countries, and you list several, are developing national artificial intelligence strategies or institutes to study it or councils to manage it. I was wondering, what does this mean for the spread of AI across government agencies and current commercial enterprises on the African continent?
Thank you very much for that very important question. One of the motivations why I wrote that article is because a lot of the literature kept saying AI does not exist in Africa, or that Africa has no framework for AI. Africa needs to catch up. Africa needs to catch up. And I'm like, wait a minute. There is a lot going on when it comes to the AI space in Africa, but not many people are aware. So beyond the use of AI in Africa, which is proliferating, there are institutional structures, legal instruments that are guiding the field of AI. Of course, it might not be as robust as that of the EU or the US or China, but there is, and I call it a normative emergence. There is an AI normative emergence within the African continent that needs to be recognized. So in my article, I mentioned 7 ways that African states are legitimizing AI. And I think it's important because I don't think anyone has done this mapping exercise before. And I mentioned number 1, African states are developing national AI strategies. Number 2, African states are establishing things like AI agencies, task force, and commissions. For example, 2 weeks ago, the Nigerian government just launched National AI and Robotics Center, right? Which is new, but it's one of the first on the continent. African states are building strategic partnerships. They're initiating public sector reform on AI. They're driving AI education, AI training and research, and they're fostering, I think the African Union is actually fostering a continental-wide approach to AI. Now you ask, what does this mean for Africa? Number 1, it means that Africans are realizing the impact and the value of artificial intelligence, not only as a growing technology that we need to leapfrog into, or we need to adopt, but as a technology that affects various aspects of our human endeavor as Africans. As a technology, what African states are realizing is that, wait, we need to develop strategies to maximize the benefit of this this new technology, but we also need to regulate the way that it might affect us disproportionately. Now, when you ask about the countries that are developing national AI strategies, this might not be like the very big countries, because when people come to Africa and they talk about AI, they look at Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya, the big AI hubs.
Yes, right.
The first country in Africa to develop a national AI strategy, I think it was Mauritius. Mauritius developed an AI strategy, and they focused it on 2 major areas. One was they wanted to develop a specialized AI academy, and secondly, they wanted to see how they could use AI for governance and business enterprise that would drive data science. So if you look at the Mauritius AI strategy, you'll see that they focused on how AI can help with oceanography because they're around water. But for some other states like Nigeria, they're looking at how AI can actually help public sector governance and improve like the education sector within the country. So yes, there's like Mauritius, Egypt, Zambia, Tunisia, Botswana. These are countries that are developing AI strategies. Now, my work and my role as a lawyer is to ensure that as they're developing these strategies, they are aware not only of the benefits that AI brings to the country, but also some of the risks that are particular to these various states.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's really fascinating. And it's one of those things, I appreciate, like you said, you're one of the first people to do such an exercise as this, to kind of, look across the continent and see, where these governments are starting to focus their attention on AI. And that makes me think, there's another book that I've been reading recently. It's called Disruptive Technologies, Innovation and Development in Africa. It's a book edited by Peter Arthur, Kobina Hansen, and Corbella Pompalou. And it's a really interesting book because, again, they're looking at disruptive technologies in several different sectors, looking at, in agriculture, in human rights, in fintech, et cetera. There's several different sectors. And one of the points that they often make in the book, and this is kind of leaning into a question, is that, a lot of people, especially from a Western perspective, look at Africa as being in such a deficit in terms of economics and access to technology, et cetera, et cetera. But they like to focus on the idea that Africa can leapfrog, right? Africa does not have to be path dependent on developing these technologies. Africa can leapfrog. So I just wondered if you could give us a little bit more insight on, again, your article is fantastic in that it identifies so many aspects of AI being investigated and also implemented on the continent. But I'm just curious if you can start to talk a little bit more about ways that you're seeing maybe Africa leapfrogging in really starting to, leapfrogging and, really implementing these new technologies in a positive way.
Absolutely. And you make a very valid point. Now, I would say three things. Now, the first thing is AI is pretty much like a double-edged sword, right? While it does provide a lot of issues when it comes to human rights, if we do not engage it properly, it does provide some benefits as well. For example, we have AI automation has resulted in the closing down of certain factories in Africa. In fact, 7 African countries have had their factory floors closed down. People who work in apparel, leather, footwear factories. So because computers can do them better and they're cheaper. And these have been replaced with speed factories in Germany and smart factories in the US. So for the past 5 years, Africa has been 600,000 people have been displaced from their jobs because computers took over them in Africa. And these are computers that took over them in other countries, right? But on the other side, there are a couple of people who have gained jobs in the AI sector. So you talk about fintech and agric, right? There are tons of people who have now gotten jobs in areas that they would not have gotten jobs in the past 4 to 5 years. So the fintech sector in Africa is growing very much. The agri sector is becoming more technologized, it's becoming more AI efficient. And so it's like a two-sided tool. On one hand, we see it providing a lot of value, but on the other hand, we see a lot of problems with it. So let's talk about some of the issues you mentioned when it comes to leapfrogging in Africa. A lot of people say, oh, Africa needs to just leapfrog. Africa needs to leapfrog. Let me explain what so first of all, what is leapfrogging, right? Developing nations, what they're saying is that Africa as a developing continent needs to bypass the earlier technologies and adopt to more advanced technologies, right? So they're saying that because some African societies have not even gotten electricity, right? Electricity is still a problem for a lot of African communities. And what leapfrogging is telling us is that, well, there's no time for you to get electricity, use a desktop and then a laptop and then an iPad and then a phone. You know what? Just go straight. Once you just go straight into the latest technology. So you're leapfrogging, you're bypassing the various levels of technological advancement. Another example would be that, well, if you've never used a computer, instead of going from a floppy 3.5 disk to a flash drive to a CD-ROM to cloud, just go straight to cloud because there's no time. Civilization and globalization is advancing so fast that you don't have time to catch up. Now, there's a problem with that. The problem with that is that if you do not advance progressively with the technology, there is a gap when it comes to understanding the technologies. A lot of Africans use AI, but they don't understand how AI works. That's number one. Number two, the power differential with that. If you're not creating a technology, but you're utilizing it and you're using it, there's a chance for what people call, what they've called it, I mean, it's called algorithmic colonialism. That, really? Yes, there's a term, algorithmic colonialization, whereby certain people the technology will become a new tool for people to be colonized by that. So leapfrogging is, people always write, leapfrogging as a solution, but these are not really, many of them are not Africans. And so they just assume that this would be the one-stop solution. For example, Nigeria is a very big user of AI, but 90% of the AI software in Nigeria is not produced in Nigeria. So we're just adopting this technology without creating them. So leapfrogging is great, but I would say my personal view is two things. Not every society needs to leapfrog. Certain societies might need to take their time to acclimatize and get used to the new technologies. And of course, some societies need to leapfrog, right? You don't need to wait to, use the media. Like what is available now, as long as you can participate, as long as you can adopt appropriately, as long as you can absorb that technology, go for it. But the most important point here about leapfrogging is the fact that beyond asking Africans to leapfrog, we need to think of how do we sustainably develop our own AI systems? Yes. How can Africans learn how to code? How can they create their own systems? It might not be as robust or as advanced as the one in the West, but we've realized from research that things that are homegrown are more sustainable. More importantly, there is an African approach to things. There's an African perspective to things. I just talked about the value of human rights, right? When it comes to the use of technology, in the West, technology seems to be a thing that needs to be owned by one person. Oh, I have the patent. Oh, I have the trademark. It's mine. Yes. But we know that when it comes to, from an African perspective, technologies need to be more open, more continuous, inclusive, collaborative, more communitarian. So as a lawyer, as a human rights lawyer from Africa, we have the African Charter on Human and People's Rights that talks about people's rights, right? People, you have a right to yourself, but your rights comes with duties to other people. It's not really a Western thing to think about. A westernized approach to AI is like, I created the technology, it's my own, and therefore whatever value I make from it belongs to me. But an African perspective would be more critical about that. Would be like, no, if you create a technology that affects the lives of other people that community members are using, then it becomes, well, you have the credit as the originator, but it's now more of a community-owned technology. And that's why when I think about rulemaking, when it comes to new technologies and AI, we need to reflect on the African perspectives, the ethical considerations that are in our own ways African. So yes, leapfrogging is great. It's a good idea. People need to leapfrog. We need to use more AI, more tech. We need to use more. But we need to create them as well. We need to learn how they are created. We need to make them more homegrown, and we need to infuse them with the values and norms from where we are from.
Fantastic. Jake, this is a great conversation. What I'd like to do now, are you getting feedback? I apologize. No? Okay, Jake, this is a great conversation. We've talked about what AI is. We've talked about what human rights are. What I'd like to do is ask you to bring in the third aspect of this discussion, which is environmental justice. And can you just link environmental justice to those other two concepts? Maybe a couple, 3 minutes, 5 minutes at max. And then what I like to do is I'd like to open up to audience questions, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
I think we cannot talk about human rights or AI without thinking about the environment. Sure. I think in this day and age, with the kinds of effects that we see in terms of climate change, adaptation, and mitigation, the environmental justice is something that needs to be at the forefront of every single thing that we do. So first of all, what is environmental justice? Because sometimes I say social justice or environmental justice, but they're very much linked to the same thing. They're directed at meeting the basic human needs and enhancing the quality of life of people. So environmental justice is about economic quality. It's about healthcare. It's about housing, food, jobs, human dignity, but more importantly about environmental protection and security. I think it's the idea that when we talk about justice, it must be justice for a lot of people, or especially the poor, because we know that when it comes to environmental degradation or climate change, the poor are the ones who are mostly affected, right?
Certainly.
When it comes to the extractive industries, taking out oil from the land or taking out coal from the land, they don't take them in big cities. They don't take them in like the state capital. They take them in like villages, local areas where people are disenfranchised by these resources, but also they are exposed to dangerous chemical pollution, and these rural communities are left without resources like land, food, and even water. So environmental justice is pretty much situating that when it comes to the issue of justice or human rights or equality, the approach must challenge the abuse of power, but must also recognize the justiciability of the people, especially the poor, who do not need to suffer from socioeconomic abuse, but should enjoy from the environment and the proceeds of the environment. Poor people should be able to have access to land, to food, to clean water, clean air, and and stuff like that. So that's exactly the framework of what environmental justice is all about. So when it comes to human rights, and that's why from an African perspective, it's very important to think of people's rights. How does your own right, how does your own work affect the rights of other people? Even if you have a license to mine or to do a particular thing or to tie a road from here to another jurisdiction or another city, the critical question of how it affects the lives of other people is very important. Even though you have a legal right to do a certain thing, but how does it affect the rights of other people? A simple example I always give is you have an orchard of like mango trees or orange trees, right? And it's your land, it's your trees and everything. So you can do anything on your land. You can break bottles on the land. You can put whatever it is. You can create a fence around it, and that's yours. But then there's going to be an issue, even within the law. But there's going to be a social issue if you put bottles on your orchard, knowing fully well that kids are likely to come into your orchard to pluck a mango or pluck an orange, and it will injure them, right? So you might have legal rights to the land, but then you need to think about the social considerations of what you're doing and how it impacts the lives of other people. Yes. So the work I have done in terms of socioeconomic, and I would reference a particular engagement I used my radio show to do, was about 2 years ago. In a local community in Kaduna State, Nigeria, where the NMP, the National Oil Company refinery, was situated there in a local community called Rido. And in that community, that is where, oil gets processed. But the community itself is like, in fact, they got worse off instead of being better off because of that, right? So with the extraction and the refining going on in their locality, they cannot even boast of a well-functioning healthcare system. They can't boast of their kids getting scholarships to even work in this particular company. They can't boast of clean water. In fact, their water is actually polluted due to the refining that goes on in their community. And so what are the various ways that we need to engage to ensure that sustainable development does not harm people, but actually make their lives better? Because, yes, that's exactly the way the construct of socioeconomic justice come from. And so what I did at the time was what I did was to facilitate the conversation between the local community and the oil refinery. So I sat there as a radio presenter and I said, all right, so good. Local community on one side, oil refinery on one side. Here is the engagement between both of you. If you can talk and engage. Of course, the refinery was like, wait, we pay all our tax, we follow all the procedure, we give the community what they deserve. Like, we're not doing anything wrong, right? But the local community is like, well, you need to realize that even though you pay your tax to a government and you fulfill all the things in your rule book, we are disproportionately affected by the fumes that come out of your factory, or maybe the jobs that you have here, or the way that you treat us, even the way that you look at us, the way you engage with us, might be problematic. So that platform to engage on, and sometimes the guys who work in these oil refineries, they don't know anything about environmental justice. They don't know anything about human rights, right? So this was an opportunity for them to talk about what their relationship would be like and how it affects their individual work.
That's a fantastic program. I wish I could have saw that. or it's your radio program. I wish I could have listened to it. No, that's fantastic. And you're right. Even in my own research, as I've mentioned in our earlier conversation, I did my work on the Extractive Industries Transparency Initiative in West Africa as well. And in the country that I was doing the field research, again, talking with corporations, they would say similar things to what you said. They say, we pay our taxes. It is not really our responsibility to take care of the city. The villages and the village people in terms of infrastructure, in terms of environmental protections, etc. So we pay our taxes. That is a state responsibility and not ours. So it's really interesting to see how, even if the context is different from state to state, the dynamics between the stakeholders, especially between civil society and communities, and the much larger transnational corporations are often very much the same. Yes.
Absolutely.
So this has been a great conversation. What I'd like to do is see if there's anyone from the audience who might have a question for Jake. What we can do is that is lining up. Check. Okay. All right, Jake. While we are waiting on the green room to get us a question,
I can see a question on the comments bar. I don't know.
Yep, I'm actually not looking at that. Okay, sorry. Here we are. Yeah. So here is a question from Sagun, and he asks, "How do we ensure the study of artificial intelligence in our schools?" Okay, so I think he's looking for programs. How can they disseminate this information?
Yeah. So I'll say three things. Number one is the way education is being, the way we think about education these days has completely changed. Education is not just being in the four walls of a classroom, and I think COVID-19 has disrupted that completely. The first thing I would say is there's a lot of value in self-education. Beyond having a curriculum to follow, a lot of people who work in AI say, "Hey, I just started by looking at YouTube videos, and I just started to learn how to code. I just picked up a book, or I joined some of these free courses online, and that's how I took off." And I'm talking about the big people in the industry today. Most of them started by self-education.
Right.
The second point I'll make about the study of AI in schools is that there are two things. One is the study of AI, and the other will be the use of AI.
Sure.
So it's important that we understand like what AI is, where it comes from, what does it entail. But it's important for us to, the best way to study it is to ensure that we, one way or the other, engage the use of AI, especially for like mathematical jobs or like things that can be practicalized with the use of software and algorithms, right? So there are various ways that we can do that. Even if you think about educating people who are like visually impaired, AI seems to be a better tool than human beings have, I mean, from research. Secondly, AI systems seem to be way better in teaching languages than human beings could. There are so many apps that could teach you how to speak better, how to use a different language better than a human being can, because the app can track where your proficiency is at and can actually use your data to train you specifically, right? I think it would be difficult today to study medicine if you don't want to engage the use of AI. Let me even pick one field, for example, like is it radiology or radiography? People that do the scans and everything.
Yeah, radiology, I believe. Yeah.
Absolutely. So AI systems can do it way better. So in terms of the study, I think one way we can ensure the study of AI in schools is to practicalize what the study of AI, but also the use of it. And I think the last point I will make is we need to redesign. There are certain jobs that are there are certain ways that we teach that are completely obsolete. If no one goes to school to learn how to type, like
yes, exactly. Good point there.
Yep. Yeah, some jobs are completely gone. So we should scrap some areas of teaching. Any area, I give an example of how speed factories have taken over people who work in like companies. So anything that has to do with assembling, if your job is to fold clothes or to assemble cartons, chances are a computer will take over that very soon, right? So we need to find ways to emphasize jobs that would not be automated in the next 5 to 10 years, so that we don't render our graduates useless, right? I think that's my answer to the question.
Okay, fantastic. And it looks like we have a question. Yes. Young lady, would you please just introduce yourself as before you ask the question to Jake?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason and Jake, for this platform. My name is Shion Akinlasa, but on social media, I'm Shion On Demand. Thank you for putting this together once again. So I just have a couple of questions for both of you. And so you talked about implicit bias on AI malfunctioning to its failure to recognize gender differences. What steps can we take to breach that gap? What would you suggest?
Thank you very much, Shion On Demand, for your very important question.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Three suggestions from me. Number one would be that people who create AI technologies need to engage with a much more representative data set. So data is what AI uses to make it make its decision. So when they're training the AI systems, they need to have data from that includes Africans specifically, because not many people engage Africans. I'll give an example. I was in China for a conference and I was in front of an AI system. You speak into the system for 1 minute and it tells you your height, your age, your weight, your sexual orientation, your race. It was really, I was shocked. It got my height, it got my age.
Wow.
But then
wow, it was accurate.
The only thing it failed is that it did not classify me as African. I think it classified me as some other race.
Gotcha.
And they were shocked. They were like, "Oh my God, it's meant to get it right." But I'm like, "Why are you shocked? How many people did you train with this AI?" Pretty much one. When it couldn't find anybody to gauge me with, it just gave me a different rate. So the number one is the data set needs to be representative. It needs to be holistic. The second point I want to make is that we need more, and I call them undersampled majority. We need more undersampled majorities in the AI sector. More women needs to be in the AI sector. More minority groups. We need more refugees, more blacks, more LGBTQ people, more women, more people living with disabilities to engage in the AI sector. Because when it comes to implicit bias, it's not that you're willingly trying to be biased or discriminatory. It's that based on who you are and based on your perception of things, you would most likely just impute that bias in the system you're creating.
Yeah.
So the second way would be for more people to use AI and in the development of AI themselves. I think the third point would be that we should be wary about techno-optimistic goals. That AI will do everything. AI will solve every problem. AI is the solution. I don't think so. I feel that technology is not the only way for change.
Yeah.
And we need to look at specific sectors where we might be like, maybe we don't really want AI in this sector. Maybe for Africa, for example, if Nigeria has a population of 200 million plus, I don't think we need AI to be assembling clothes and assembling boxes. We have people that can do that, and we need their jobs.
We have the labor.
We have the labor. So maybe we can think of healthcare, maybe, because we don't have that many doctors in Africa. Maybe we can think of healthcare. We can think of agri, maybe. But in terms of setting in like the floor chain of like a factory, we might want to we don't want AI there. So having these conversations, very, very important.
It is. And then thank you for mentioning that. And your responses just makes me think back to, I mean, I've been out of Nigeria I left Nigeria 20 years ago, but I've taken time over the last few years to return as often as possible. I have a nonprofit that takes back to school items each year as well. Just put in my quarter to same development. I'm very much on the education sector. Like I'm pushing education and, children remaining in school no matter what. And it just makes me realize by your response right now how far back we are with, you look at most of the schools in Africa, in Nigeria, they hardly have a computer. How do you teach AI when you don't even have the most basic, which is, a computer in itself? So we're super far behind. I think a lot of the reorientation starts from the grassroots, which in this case would be from the education sector. Like, how do we start in making sure that children in nursery schools, elementary schools are introduced to computers, comfortable with the ideas of using computers. And only then do they begin to think in the broader sense and start thinking in artificial intelligence. So that's one area that I feel like is super lagging when it comes to the African continent in general. And I feel like a lot of emphasis needs to be on that point. If we can get everybody technologically enabled, then we have a greater chance of introducing advanced technology to them and having them, imbibe it and be a part. You just become very comfortable. But how as a doctor do you practice medicine with AI when you don't even have the basic understanding of how a computer works? And you find out that because somebody studied medicine in school, they actually don't have a basic understanding of, the workings of a computer, because it's medicine, never thinking of how technology could actually help, diagnosis. I work in the healthcare industry now. My background is also in information systems. I'm right there as a program manager, bridging technology and healthcare together for United Healthcare in the US. And I see all of those things. And sometimes the programs and projects we work on, I'm just thinking, my goodness, I can't wait until Nigeria gets to this point. And it also opens my eyes to how far behind we are. So that's one of the reasons I'm super grateful and thankful for conversations like this and people like you, Jake, that are having this kind of conversations and bringing and shedding light to the problems that we have. Given that, I have one more question for you guys, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay. So, you had mentioned the pace of AI advancement and your advice on not forcing countries to leapfrog. What developmental strategy do you propose for developing countries in Africa?
So yes, I would make this. So the strategies I would say is, because I talked about homegrown solutions, right?
Correct.
Meeting African countries at the very levels that they are. I'll give an example. When it comes to use of technology, Botswana, Zambia, Rwanda, Nigeria, Kenya are not on the same level with like Mali, Niger, or like Burkina Faso, for example. So I find a lot of people just say Africa needs Africa. I'm like, Africa is so diverse and at so different levels of their technology. There's no one size fits all. You
Certainly, right?
Countries at their very immediate need. For some countries, they're not even talking AI. They need electricity first. For some countries, they've started electricity, but they need the technologies, the computers, the software. Yep. For some countries, they've got all that. They now need the AI. So countries need to be matched at their level of development.
Yes.
Giving a one-size-fits-all is really not going to work. But the other point I would make about the point you made, Shane, about education is that we need to start thinking skills-based education. As a kid, for example, growing up in Nigeria, they will tell you recite 2 times 2 4, 3 times 2 6. Like, it's about what you know. What you know was what determined as intelligent.
It becomes rote. Yes.
Yeah. This person sabi book. He knows book, meaning that he's read a lot of books. That's not going to work anymore. Today, what you know doesn't get you anywhere, because anything you ask me, Google can tell me in 2 seconds.
Absolutely.
That information. Why do I need to cram it? We need to think about skills-based learning. People need to learn how to do things that other people cannot do by themselves. People need to learn how to use technology. People need to learn how to speak several languages. People need to, and I think for Africa, where we have like a lot of manpower and a lot of people who are not in school, even if people cannot afford the 4 walls of a classroom, we might need to have like sports universities, people that learn sports, right?
Yeah.
We need to diversify with the value of what we have.
Absolutely.
China and India are maximizing the AI world because they have population, right?
Yeah.
When I was in China, I mean, China has 400 million workforce. 400 million workforce. So the same conversation about where tech can apply and where tech can't apply, China was smart about that. You don't just automate the entire, you have to pick and choose. I think we need to do that for Africa as well. Maybe for California, it might be great to have like machines assemble your gifts from Amazon and bring it to you. It might be great for drones to just land in front of your door and present you with your food.
Yeah.
But maybe in Africa, we don't need every city to do that. Maybe some people need to actually take the food for you. So these are some of the engagements we need to have. I think when it comes to education, there needs to be a complete revamp, but I think it provides an opportunity for us to create other avenues that were not there before. Absolutely. From a more knowledge-based to a more skills-based learning.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you. That was a great answer. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Sharon.
All right.
Thank you for participating. Really appreciate it.
No problem. Take care.
Yeah.
You too.
Jason, I think you have a question from...
Yeah, I see a question, but that one's a partial question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a question based on one of the other ones that was mentioned a little bit earlier. And Saylan mentioned something. She's talking about healthcare. She's talking about education. And you started to talk about this. When we think of artificial intelligence, right, we also, it's pretty much a domain that is, being capitalized on by corporations, right? They have the technology. They're doing the R&D, the research and development, etc. Governments have the wealth, and to purchase products and implement them, right? So governments have access to AI. I'm wondering, is there any examples you could give us in terms of how AI is being utilized by either civil society organizations, NGOs, anything like that, at the civil society level, as opposed to the government or the corporate level?
Absolutely.
Anything like that happening yet?
Absolutely. And I could even give you instances from Africa. But before I say that, let me talk about something you mentioned, which is the fact that the kingpins in the use of AI are pretty much private corporations. So Amazon, for example, is like richer than half of the world. Like that, if you put 50 countries together, Amazon as a company is way much more richer than than states, and that talks about the role of geopolitics in this fast globalizing world. For example, Amazon was going to set up its headquarters, and Amazon asked countries to bid. Like countries were bidding for where Amazon would have its next headquarters, right? That just changed like that changes the dynamic. And when
we had a similar dynamic here in the United States where cities were petitioning Amazon where they were going to put their headquarters here in the US. So you're talking about it happening internationally, geopolitically. It's also happening within the United States as well. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's fine. So we need to think about the capitalistic nature of technology generally. And so when you see activists or human rights activists use artificial intelligence, they're actually trying to disrupt the capitalistic nature of it in a more unique way. So, for example, I'm going to cite a few examples as to how human rights people how activists have used AI or are using AI, in Africa. So first of all, there is an AI lab in Accra. So the first Google lab in Africa is in Ghana, and it does a lot of work around socioeconomic rights, how to promote the standard of living for like local indigenes with the use of AI. So it's a research lab, but it also provides a lot of value for locals. But we have situations in Nigeria, for example, where NGOs are using AI to track hate speech on social media. So they're looking at, it's an algorithm actually, it just tracks Twitter, Facebook to find out what Nigerians are saying and where the hate speech is coming from. Is hate speech triggered from like political statements or political debates, or is it more from tribalistic ones, right? So what they've discovered so far is that people thought that because of we're such a heterogeneous society with over 300 plus ethnic groups, that tribe and religion is really where the tensions are. But I think the AI is tracking this conversation on social media, and it's showing that Nigerians actually get much more riled when it comes to political debates than tribal debates, right? So it's important for activists to even know this information, to know where their interventions can come from, right? We also have activists, and these are also human rights activists, but in Uganda and Kenya, people who use AI to sort of track, for crop rotation purposes, like where should we plant the next set of crops, what the weather would be like AI helping them to predict the weather, but also predict the soil, I think the pH level in the soil, help them predict what farming seasons are best for what particular crops. Now, these things are not things that could have been done in the past 10 to 15 years. Maybe they were like traditional knowledge experts who tell them on some of these things, but AI is able to actually help these local farmers to help them predict what kinds of planting season they're going to meet. We also have activists who are using AI to track human rights violations on the continent. I'll give a very, very, very recent example. So there's a big NSAS protests across Nigeria and across the world over the push for the end of police brutality in Nigeria, and one of the setbacks from the government has been denial that there was no killings or shootings from military men on protesters. This actually went really viral. Like a lot of people believed that the killings were framed, that there were really no killings, despite the fact that there were videos on social media, despite the fact that activists actually used their phones and Instagram to show what was happening on that particular day. Now, what happened? CNN did use AI to use these videos from social media, and the AI system was able to track the location where these videos were shot, to track the time of the day. So you might not know if it's 6 or 7 p.m., but the AI system was able to track the time, the location, and the validity of those videos, whether they're fake or not a deep fake, whether they're real or otherwise, and put together a documentary that has now shown that, yes, there were killings on that day in Lekki in Lagos, and that the killings were perpetrated by military officials on armed protesters. So these are some of the ways by which activists get to utilize artificial intelligence to promote social justice and social good.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Yeah, thanks for that example. We do have another question from the audience. Please, could you please introduce yourself before asking the question?
All right. Ayorinde Ogunyola. I'm a PhD student here in the United States. And I want to thank Jake and Jason for organizing this. I know AI actually has its benefits, which has been discussed, but I'm also concerned about some of the risk in terms of probably what's your perspective based on data privacy that AI actually comes with, trust and transparency that actually evolves around the development of AI.
Good question.
Very valid question. And I always say this because I am a PhD student as well, and I'm looking at the impact of AI on human rights in Africa. And I always start with the rosy picture. For example, Egypt is projecting to adopt AI that will contribute 7.7% to its GDP by 2030. Botswana is thinking of AI projects that will move the country from an upper middle income country to a high income country by 2036. South Africa wants to be fully AI integrated. In fact, Senegal, Jason, you've been to Senegal. They are building an AI city that is 35 kilometers away from its capital. So there's like all these very rosy, innovative prospects for what AI can do. But Ayo, the major point that you've made is why we are doing research in this area to show people that yes, AI can become a strategic priority for African countries, but we need to be wary about the way it's hyped. This way that AI is getting such hype is not really the case all the time. It's not a silver bullet that can solve all of our continent's problems. AI can perpetuate and exacerbate some of the extant issues that we face on the continent, and it can even introduce new risks that we didn't have before. So when it comes to things like infringing our autonomy, infringing our transparency, the privacy of citizens, or including how AI can take over certain people's jobs and create job displacement, how AI can perpetuate inequality, and how AI can actually promote negative systemic biases. These are some of the things that we as Africans need to be particular about, especially because from past history, we've been colonized and we know what it means for a power structure to hegemonize us. We don't want AI to do the same thing and maybe do it even worse. So beyond the fact that, yes, AI is gaining some great ambition in Africa and is cascading into this like super great infrastructure that has been adopted really fast, really quick, and really profitable, but we need to be very critical about some of these challenges that are particular to us and find ways to mitigate them or eliminate them.
Yeah. Sure. I just wanted to add because you made mention that, which is a very interesting point and important point. AI in itself cannot just, like you said, other countries have gone through different trajectories, and you can't just bring AI to, for instance, Africa, and then it works out. You know, it's going to affect a lot of things in terms of jobs. Though we could do reskilling, but that also is capital intensive. So I mean, it's gonna go a long way for AI to actually benefit the African nation, so to say. Yeah,
absolutely. And that's why we need more research. We need more people doing research in these areas. We need more conversations like we're doing at the Green Room here about these issues so that people can actually pick them up, learn more about them. And so even our policymakers, because for me as a researcher on AI in Africa, when I pick up documents from the African Union, when I look at the various AI strategies by African states, they have a lot more techno-heroic than they are critical. Some of them are just copy and paste, like AI will do this. And I'm like, okay, that's it. Blockchain, IoT, quantum computing, deep learning, machine learning, like they're just throwing it out there without investigating what type. Again, these technologies are great. Don't get me wrong. We want them. We need them. But who are the people making these technologies, and do they make them for us? If they are making them for us, do we know? Did they engage us from the beginning? Like, hey, we're planning to make a technology for this sector in Africa. And so from the beginning, you're engaging Africans on the process. You're engaging Africans on how, I just sent an article for publication in a journal, and I wrote about self-driving cars in Africa. And I say self-driving cars is not a when issue. It's not an if issue, it's a when issue.
Sure.
There will be self-driving cars in Africa. But as they are creating self-driving cars now, we need them to understand that on African roads, there are potholes. On African roads, there are conductors, there are gala sellers, people that sell like I said on the road. Like on African roads, it's a different nomenclature, right? We don't have internet-enabled traffic lights. We have we have wardens, right? Do these AI systems recognize that our road structure might not be the same way with other road structures, in other parts of the world, right? And it's interesting. I mean, maybe when the article comes out, I could share, but there's nothing new with AI. The same way previous technologies have affected us, that's the same way it would be. In Mozambique, for example, a car is likely to kill a person 25 times faster than it will kill someone in Sweden, even though there are more cars in Sweden than there are in Mozambique. Why is it that way? It's not the car that is the problem. It's the infrastructure and the climate around where that car is being ridden. What kinds of policies or road policies govern driving in Mozambique? What kinds of cars are there? What is the efficiency of those cars, and what happens when a person drives drunk or does not drive drunk in that particular location? So the car is a great technology, no one doubts that. But why does it kill more people in Mozambique than it kills in Sweden, even though there are less cars in Mozambique? So those are some of the things we need to be critical about.
Yeah. Thank you so much for answering my questions.
Thank you, Ayorinde.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for participating. Great to meet you.
Same here.
Okay, Jake, we have a question here from Sonny. And Sonny is asking, I like the way that this question is framed. How has AI promoted human rights? Seeing that there's, it usually has this connotation of replacement of human labor leading to socioeconomic challenges.
Yeah. I know people say I don't bash AI because I'm being critical of AI does not mean I bash AI. I will tell you so many ways that AI has promoted human rights, and I can mention it in 5 quick ways. Number one, when it comes to education, right? I mean, Jason, you're in the US. I know Nigerians who never went to a university, but they learned how to code, and they're creating tools and software that are just like groundbreaking. I have friends who are from like local villages in Nigeria, and the next thing they are in California and they're pitching their ideas and they're making huge amounts of money from their local ideas. They didn't need to go through the 4 walls of a university to gain that knowledge. So AI has expanded the scope of education and has given more people outside the 4 walls of a classroom to gain education and sort of, improve their lives with that. So in terms of advancing education, there's so many ways that AI have helped people learn languages better, especially kids with special needs. There are certain kids who might not do well in a classroom or with a physical teacher. For example, some autistic children learn better with AI tools and technologies than they would with a physical teacher. So when it comes to the right to education, AI has done a good job on that front. Second would be the right to work. I know I talk about job displacement with AI. And I mentioned that in the past 5 years, 600,000 people have been displaced by smart factories in Germany or speed factories in the US. But 4.1 million people in Africa have gained jobs in fields that came through by the use of new tech and AI. So there's so many job opportunities that have come through within the sector. Of course, these jobs are not like for lower class Africans, unfortunately. They're like middle class and up. But at some point, they're disrupting certain areas and they're providing more jobs. So that's another front. Let's talk about AI and healthcare. AI has actually helped with the advancement of healthcare. For example, there are certain algorithms that can just take a scan of your entire body and tell you if you would be liable to have a heart disease, or can track cancer even at its very, very minimal stage. A doctor might not tell, you might not have any symptom, but the AI is able to look at certain things. I don't know what it looks at in your body, but it can tell you if you're liable to have a specific infection or disease, or if there's a cancerous growth in your body. So in terms of being able to track healthcare and deliver healthcare services, AI has been able to do that. I'll mention two other examples. When it comes to the right to, what happened? Am I the only one? Okay, I think I lost Jason, or Jason lost me. Sorry. I don't know. Sorry about this. Let me. Or maybe I can just continue. Okay, you're back. Okay. Sorry.
I'm going to be representing Jason for the meantime.
Okay. So I was just mentioning a few areas that AI has advanced human rights. I've talked about the right to work. I've talked about the right to education. I've talked about the right to health. I think one other way would be, okay, Jason, you're back. One other way would be how AI is advancing activism on the continent. So people are now able to report certain things with evidence behind them. With the NSAS protest and the hashtag Lekki massacre, if it was 10 years ago where we didn't have mobile smartphones that were connected to the internet and stuff like that, we would not have been able to see or have evidence of what had really transpired. So human rights activists are finding really innovative ways to use AI, not only to document human rights violations, but to track them and to sort of give them credibility so they can be used as evidence in the court and to advance justice for people whose lives have been affected by these violations.
Okay. Great, Jake. I do apologize. I don't know if you noticed, we had some technical difficulty there for the last maybe 2 minutes. So we had a little disruption in the connection. I don't know if it was from my end, your end, or somewhere else in between. So that there may be questions about that last comment, only because I don't think it was complete for our audience. So as we're starting to wind down, I don't see any new questions from the audience, but I think I've got a pretty good question to kind of finalize this here and kind of wrap things up. We're talking about how artificial intelligence impacts human rights on the African continent. And this has links to things like social justice, environmental justice. In one of your articles, you talk about fostering a Pan-African approach to AI. And I find this really interesting and important because even as you mentioned, some of the AI programming doesn't always recognize race, etc., or ethnicities, these sorts of things. We really need to have a broad array of data. So we need a lot of different perspectives, a lot of people working on this. So can you just give us a little bit of an idea as we round out this fantastic discussion? Can you tell us a little bit about the Pan-African approach to AI in some of the institutions that comprise that apparatus?
Absolutely, Jason. Thank you so much. And this is a really valid question because as a continent, Africa the African Union is thinking about a Pan-African approach to how AI can be legitimized within the continent. Last year, the African ministers who are responsible for communication and information, they adopted a declaration that focused on a coordinated approach to AI. So what member states of the AU did is that they have agreed that they want a common position whereby AI can be used to legitimize the Malabo Convention on Cybersecurity. So we do have a convention in Africa that regulates cybersecurity, because when it comes to issues around the internet or the use of cyberware, it's not a jurisdictional thing. AI and the internet, you cannot limit them to one state or one jurisdiction. So therefore, there's need for solidarity and a coordinated approach, especially for African states that are very weak in terms of the use and adoption of these technologies. So what the African Union is doing is that they have a working group on AI that is fostering a common African stance on AI. Particularly, there is something called the African Union Agenda of 2063. It's called the Africa We Want. So it's actually a blueprint, really, like a master plan for how Africa can really transform itself as a global powerhouse of the future. And of course, Africa cannot transform itself without thinking about how the use of technologies would affect the continent. So this Agenda 2063 does talk about ways that we need AI to help our various sectors from education, agriculture, healthcare work, but it also needs to think about data protection and how do we achieve socioeconomic and sustainable growth development that are hinged on Pan-Africanism and African Renaissance ideals. So yes, there is a conversation going on at the African Union level. Yes, it is striving, it is promising, and there's a great coordination at the point of how we can use AI to promote African virtues, African values, and African interest. But my only critique is that it has not been as deep and as entrenched enough. But again, I give it more credit than I give it more critique, because I noticed that they actually tie the use and prospect of AI on things like our African Union Agenda 2063 and the current laws and norms that govern our affairs within the continent.
Okay. Fantastic, Jake. This has been a really great conversation. Unfortunately, as we round out the first hour, here we are having difficulty with the internet connection. We have a lot of benefits with our modern technology, yet sometimes we have a few difficulties as well. I really am pleased that Jake is here today for our 7th episode of The Green Room. I really want to thank Jake, and I want to ask everybody out there again. We can't hear those claps, but we can feel those claps through the universe. So I just want to thank Jake Effoduh for joining us today and talking with us about artificial intelligence artificial intelligence, human rights, and environmental justice on the African continent. This is a really fascinating discussion, and it's something that we are going to have to keep our eye on as this really fast-moving technology develops and is implemented in Africa as well as other places around the world. Jake, really grateful for you being here. Thank you so much. I want to wish you the best of luck with your academic and professional endeavors. Please stay in touch. We'd love to see you again here on the Green Room in the future.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jason. It's such an honor and a privilege to have had this discourse with you. And thank you for having me on board. And I'm really inspired by your work as well. I look forward to engaging more with the Green Institute and to be back here at the Green Room any day, anytime. So thank you so much for the opportunity. And thanks to everyone who tuned in, who joined, who asked a question, who contributed. Thank you very much and have a wonderful day as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. You also have yourself a great day. We'll be following your career.
All right.
Take care, my friend.
Thank you.